35th anniversary of The Killing Joke. All right, this was it for me. This was Batman for me. This combined with The Dark Knight was what, to this day, the standard I hold Batman storytelling to. All due respect to Neil Adams, all due respect to those guys in the 70s and the 80s that were telling Batman stories, and they were doing just fine. They did great. Frank Miller's The Dark Knight, and we did a stream on this about a year or so ago. The Sci-Fi Center presents the influence of Frank Miller's Dark Knight. I'm going to post that up here pretty soon. Those two books, those two stories, to me, changed everything. It also, in my opinion, it influences the portrayal of the Joker from that point on. Not in the cartoon. I don't count the cartoon. But as far as like cinematically, you look at, in my opinion, Heath Ledger's Joker is an amalgam of The Long Halloween, but you also got to look, in my opinion, to some of the psychosis that you see in Batman: The Killing Joke. Alan Moore regrets certain aspects of The Killing Joke. He thinks that the violence and what happened to Barbara Gordon was over the top and gratuitous in hindsight. To me, it lined the Joker up with a standard serial killer. It showed you just how crazy and how dangerous he could be and how he views things. His interaction with Batman is to this day is some of the best interaction in the entire time they've been being put in ink on comics. The opening scene where Batman and him are talking to each other, he doesn't realize he's not talking to the Joker, but he's talking to the Joker about this eventual end of the cycle of violence between them. One of them is going to die. He says, and it's quote, "I'm going to kill you or you're going to kill me." And they've gone through this vicious circus so long that Batman knows, he sees the writing on the wall. Whereas the Joker, this entire graphic novel, he's out to prove a point. He's out to prove a point, and the point he's trying to prove is the same point that Heath Ledger Joker is trying to prove with Harvey Dent, that on any day, one bad day can push someone over the edge. And that every one of them, including Batman, including Commissioner Gordon, who he's using as his guinea pig, can be driven crazy. And once they do that, remember in The Dark Knight, and he says, when given an opportunity, these people, they'll feed on each other. And that's the exact same point that I think that Alan Moore was using the Joker to prove in The Killing Joke. Now, in The Dark Knight, he kills him. But in The Killing Joke, for those of you who haven't read it, it is a must read. It is a must read. Starts out with Batman visiting what he thinks is the Joker. Joker's already escaped, but he has a stand-in for him, and he's got a guy in there with makeup, and Batman's having this back and forth with him. Then he grabs the Joker by the hand and says, "Aren't you listening to me?" And he realizes that there's makeup coming off the guy's hands. And that's when he realizes the Joker's escaped. Joker's been out for a while now, and his plan is to take the commissioner, one of the symbols of law and order in Gotham City, and show him that with all his rules and all his rigid society, he's no different than anybody else that can be broken. Pays a visit to Commissioner Gordon's house. The infamous scene where he shoots Barbara Gordon in the back through the spine, paralyzes her. Not only does he paralyze her, but he strips her and takes pictures of her, which he then uses when he has Commissioner Gordon captured, and he's showing him these pictures of his helpless daughter in an attempt to make Commissioner Gordon snap to the point where his rules don't matter. And that's the whole point of the story, is him trying to make both Batman and him. And there's something that Commissioner Gordon says when Batman rescues him. He says, "Do this by the book." He has to know that our way works. He is determined to prove the Joker wrong, as the Joker is trying. And it's this battle of wills. But what always impressed me about The Killing Joke is just the outward violence of it. You always hear me say the 3Ds: death, dismemberment, and destruction. And a lot of time we're using it as a joke. Here, there's a certain thing when you're telling your story right, that the violence is necessary, and it works if it is applied right. The brutality works if it is applied right and it is relevant to the story. The Killing Joke does all of this perfectly. The brutality on Barbara Gordon, it's not gratuitous. It's trying to take the one thing that means the most. There's two things that means the world to Commissioner Gordon: the law and its daughter. So he's putting one in mortal danger and making Commissioner Gordon question the other. So everything that happens in The Killing Joke, although controversial even to this day and brutal, was necessary to drive home the point of what the Joker was, where he's at in all this chaos, and the method to his madness. I'm going to bring up some of the more stunning images of this cover. This is the cover as it looked on the first printing. Now it's been pre-printed a bunch of times. The first printing is actually not that expensive for it being around, being reprinted. But this was also made back in the days where it was a trade. It was a graphic novel, but it was also a trade, and they reprinted them because they wanted to sell them in volume. So there's still plenty of a lot of the first printings around. And this is when he had captured Commissioner Gordon, and this is at the point where he's trying to drive him mad. And he's just trying to push him to the brink to prove a point to both Commissioner Gordon, but also to prove a point to Batman, because he sees Batman as the order to his chaos, but he does not see the need for the order. And that's what The Killing Joke is. It's a battle between order and chaos, and which one can win out. Is the order on a fragile, foundation to the point where it can be broken up? And that's like anything. Everything that we have that is organized and that represents society, can it be just tipped over on one bad day? And that was an experiment that Joker was sure that he could prove. The visuals in this are just crazy. I mean, the crazy midgets that he's hiring. I mean, the thugs that he has them all in this circus. And the way that it's Brian Bolin is who did the artwork for this, and his artwork in this is stunning.
One thing I'd add to what you're saying about the artwork is that this might maybe a little bit of an outlier for a lot of people, but the Joker, he's had a lot of really extreme variations in his look over the years. I mean, he's recent, within the last few years, he's had, he's skinned his own face and put it back on. But the thing about The Killing Joke, that's really the thing I find so haunting about a lot of in The Killing Joke is he has the hat on with the shadow that partially obscures his face. So in a lot of ways, that's kind of like, you don't usually see the Joker with a mask, but there's something just so unsettling about that image of the Joker. I mean, it portrays him in such a sinister, just dark, demonic sort of presence that you just, as you said, like up to that point, we hadn't seen that often in comics, with the Joker, and until this point.
And the brim of the hat where his eyes glowed through was kind of cool. Bolin did that.
Oh God, yeah.
Now here in this scene right here, this is where Bruce visits her in the hospital, and this is actually in Spanish. I just grabbed the image, but I know this by heart. But there is something she notices about him, because at this point in the story, obviously they've gone through the dance with the Joker before. She said there's something different about him this time, and she notices it. And if you take this Joker story and juxtapose them on all the Joker stories that have ever been told, this is a different Joker than we've ever seen. He's taken it to a level that to this point had never been seen by him or most villains in comics. And that's another thing that Alan Moore and the creators were trying to tell you in this. This wasn't your dad's Joker. This wasn't Cesar Romero. This wasn't a cartoon. This was the psychopath that, had we not held back all these years of Joker storytelling, this is a psychopath that the Joker would have evolved into.
Yeah, I mean, he's one step below Art the Clown in Killing Joke.
And there's a little John Wayne Gacy in there too, if you look at it. Here's I won't go into the other ones because in the book it shows, a lot more. But this is the scene that, changed a lot of things for people. I remember when I bought this at my comic book store. Joe, so just imagine how kind of skittish we are about certain things and cancel culture and all that kind of crazy stuff, that we have now, right? This is in 1988. This was 35 years ago. This wasn't happening in comic books. you had your independent comic books that were like, like the Judge Dredd and some of the, the innovation comics that were kind of like risque and stuff like that, but they weren't the main line DC Marvel type things. This was happening in a DC comic. The shooting and paralyzing of her was one thing, but then what he does afterwards, she's laying there bleeding, could possibly dying, and then he's doing what he's doing. And it was weird because we're in the 80s, we're in the slasher area, this wasn't the kind of sadistic stuff that you saw.
Yeah, I mean, and not to get political on it, but this is also, we're talking about the Reagan era, and you had things like RoboCop and a lot. I mean, pushing the envelope was in a lot of ways really, kind of it was almost taken for granted in a lot of pop culture at this point in time. And definitely, as you said, even by that standard, Killing Joke in comics at this time, this was really taking it to a just way beyond what anybody would have anticipated.
I remember the women's groups that were tearing this up. I remember the PTA, the parents group that were tearing this up. And if you didn't understand the Killing Joke at the time, you would have been one of those people. He shoots a woman in the back, strips her, and takes pictures of her. On the face value of that, that's awful. That's
it's monstrous.
That's preposterous. Why are you doing this? If you just heard it that way and didn't know what was going on in the story, you had every reason in 1988 to go after these people until you read it. And once you read it, the things he does, the actions he takes aren't really the story. It's what he's trying to do. The whole making Commissioner Gordon feel so helpless that he gives up on his rules, making Batman so angry that he gives up on his rules. And now we look at The Dark Knight. Remember that scene when they're on the barges and he gives the people, the prisoner people have the bombs and the rich people, they have the bombs, and one of them has to blow each other up before the other one does, because the Joker thinks that when push comes to shove, people are going to become the animals, the feral animals that he has become. And then he's proven wrong. And Batman tells him, you're wrong. People are better than that. And it's this, but you look, Dark Knight came out in 2008. So 20 years prior, The Killing Joke set the stage for that battle.
By the way,
go ahead.
Well, I just wanted, we were talking about the boat scene in The Dark Knight, and one thing I thought I'd add there, and I don't know if you would see, there's a bit of a fan theory. It's actually one I've had for myself for a while, is with the Joker saying, everybody on the boat, blow up the other boat first, and I'll let you go free. There's a fan theory. It's that he tells them he gave each of them the detonator for the opposite boat, but his trick was that he'd actually given them the detonator for their own boat. So that was like his kind of last, sort of way of getting the last laugh on all of them. And I was kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that, because that strikes me as something that he would do.
Yeah, I mean, it just, and like I said, I guess in some ways you had to be collecting comics at this time, because a lot of the younger generation, they're looking backwards to this stuff now, and I was looking forward from it. So it was what I was living at the time. See, and this is what it brings me back to Batman the Animated. I understand you guys love it. It's not poor quality stuff. You take the bat off of his chest and you take him out of Gotham, that's a really good procedural cartoon. The problem, I don't have a problem as much with 90s animation. I know I make fun of it. I have a problem with 90s animation having a disproportionate effect on storytelling going forward, because that's what tends to happen. You think you got an audience, let's steer everything to that audience. So in the same, my freshman year in high school, when I'm buying Batman: The Killing Joke and having already had Dark Knight, and then a year later, my sophomore year, getting Death in the Family, where they kill Robin, and the same term of high school, I'm getting Batman the Animated Series. So I held in my hand the brutality, the honest brutality that the relationship of Batman and the Joker and what Gotham is and everything is in my hand as a freshman, but by the time I was a senior, I had softcore Batman. And I'm like, Mark Hamill, you did a great job as Joker. I'm not knocking the quality of it. This is the Joker to me.
And I mean, those were very, definitely, important to me in my kind of early, DC fandom as a kid. But and what you were talking about though, with as far as the animated series having like a disproportionate impact on just the overall, mythos of the character, the Joker and Batman and all that. Like one thing I might need some help on this. Did Hamill, did he voice the Joker in the Killing Joke animated movie? I need, because he's voiced the Joker in damn near every Joker incarnation there's been, but and of course that came, that had its own controversies that were ironically, sort of independent of the ones that were built into it. That sort of arose out what they added to the Killing Joke animated movie, which
the sex that yeah, you know what, to be honest with you, now when you talk about that animation, I'm on board with the modern stuff because it's actually along the same lines. The 90s stuff wasn't, but they kind of came home with those things. Yeah, the sex scene with Barbara and Batman, it didn't bother me. I didn't think it was necessary, but you know what, that's fine. They didn't take away. I'm surprised that they went as far as they did in that cartoon. The Killing Joke cartoon.
Yeah, I think so too.
When I heard that they were making that, I'm like, oh no.
You thought they were gonna like really water it down.
And like I said, here's the thing when it comes to this type of brutality. I understand it's disturbing to people, but if you're a storyteller and that is the tool that you're using to emphasize, don't take away from your storytelling just because it might make people uncomfortable. If you can't use the tools to tell your story, no matter what it is, then don't tell your story. Don't sugarcoat it for me. That's why I always say when you're doing a movie on a brutal serial killer, but you don't want to detail his crimes because you think that's over the top, too gratuitous. To me, when you're telling a story like this, you're making a court case. You're not trying to get a verdict out of me, but you're trying to get an emotional connection out of me. How am I supposed to feel the emotional connection if I don't know the extent of what he did? It's kind of like the Freddy Krueger effect. Freddy Krueger did awful things to children. That was implied and not implied. But here we are laughing and joking with Freddy. I'm like, but and it's like, let the storyteller do his thing. If you don't want to watch it, that's one thing. But like I said, this is the Joker to me. This is what it, the edge that they put on comics in the late 80s. And then they kind of went away from it in the mid 90s. And I think that's where DC and Marvel tried to make what was a hard